Well, I am first a student of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and his student, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So a lot of my views are consistent with his in the sense that when we look at democracy, or even before I go into democracy, I remember at the time, prior to 75, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad had the followers not to vote. And now in the day of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, we are voting. But there was a reason why he said we shouldn't vote prior to 75. He said you should not give ignorant people the right to vote, meaning that the masses of our people were not very astute in the voting process or very much so aware of the political ramifications and the politics of voting. So, when the people have lost their mind, lost their way, lost their knowledge of self, they get to give them power. It's almost to, in a sense, give children the right to vote when they really don't know the whole scope of what they're doing. So now that we have a better grasp, we have a better understanding of the voting process, then those that want to vote can. Even though that we have a democracy doesn't mean that when you vote for the person that you want, that person will save you or deliver you or give you what you want, because we're living in an institution where it's not necessarily controlled by democracy, by the people, but it's controlled by those that have power, those that are in power, the lobbyists, that lobby politicians. I remember someone saying one time, we need to buy a politician, the ones that are in the struggle, meaning that those that are bought off or sell out and no more consider the people they are paid for. We're not paying for our politicians. You're not giving them no benefits. Of course, you don't want to necessarily pay your politicians, but the power for a politician is one, they're going to get paid, or the masses of the people are so strong that they're forced to listen. They are forced to have to hear the words of the people. If the people are not organized, then the politician will go with whoever has more influence and use their influences in the way of funding and money and lobbyists and major corporations that want them to go in their way. So even though we seek for democracy, democracy is dependent on how organized the people are and how powerful the organization that we're coming against. That determines the democracy, not the vote of the people. But as I said, as a student of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, we also believe that democracy, as we know, comes from theocracy, meaning not necessarily rule of the people, but rule of the devil by its definition. So we believe in theocracy. Theocracy meaning rule of God. So when we're living in a world, whether you can take that meaning from face value or not, the majority of the things that we see in politics and government today is not a rule of God. It is a rule of Satan. Meaning the policies and things that are being going on, the wars that we are fighting, is not a war of God, because God said love your enemies. There's never been a war where we want to negotiate and talk before we bomb. We have gone to war based off lies, as we know our former President Bush went to the war on the lie of weapons of mass destruction, and even beyond not finding the weapons of mass destruction, we still continue to fight. But this is a person we voted for. But regardless of who you vote for, once they get in office, they may not have the power that's needed to change anything, as we see with our brother Barack Obama. Whether he has good intentions and is a good-hearted person, if the neocons or the neoconservatives who have bought out our government, who have corrupted our government, says to go in a certain way, in a certain direction, then that's where it will go. If other people, such as the world bankers, want America to go in a certain direction, then it will go in a certain direction. So when we talked about democracy also depends on how intelligent the people are. As it relates to democracy, if the people are misled and lied to based off media, then the people will believe what media is telling them, so they will vote in a certain way that people that are in power have set the trend, have set the social engineering for people to believe one thing. So as we look at the violence on the streets, we'll call for the National Guard because we think that's the saving grace, instead of finding a way to re-educate or give people jobs. But we would want to bring in the National Guard. Or we will believe that those Muslims over there are killers and terrorists, or we'll believe that it's necessary for us to be in Afghanistan. We'll believe that we're necessary to be in Iraq. We will not listen to any other things that are necessary to look at other information outside of America to see America properly. So our democracy has been ripped and robbed. So we think that we're voting for the right thing. We think that we are empowered by electing those that help us. But as I said before, the most honorable Elijah Muhammad said, do not give ignorant people the right to vote. And I may be quoting him wrong, but the point is, if you don't have thorough knowledge of the process, thorough knowledge of what's going on, then you're just being used as a pawn in a bigger game, as we see with this bigger war that's growing. And as Minister Farrakhan has written, President Bush, or former President Bush, 2 letters before, said that this is going to be a wider war, and that people will come back in body bags before this war ever came off. So, and as we're seeing, over 4,000 soldiers have been laid to rest in a non-ending war, because when they said that this is a war against terror, I don't know if anybody ever asked, what is terror? So we're fighting a war of terror, and we're supporting a war of terror, and not thoroughly understanding what it is. So democracy in its meaning, no. Democracy in its present state, no. I think some people, not as the definition is, but socialism, not that I'm a socialist, but when we think about that, we want a country that has a government that's for the people and by the people, where everyone is treated equal and everyone is given a fair opportunity to live in peace and happiness, and given the God opportunity to have the freedom to justify their existence, to be equal to all mankind, meaning that they have the ability to gain wealth as others have. They have the ability to gain education as others have. Just as, education should be free, healthcare can be free, just like in Cuba, it shouldn't be for the rich, and the poor continues to suffer. Those are my views on the question about democracy.